hard to believe I've been here 11 years and been involved with the board for, I guess, close to 8 years in some capacity or one another. But I've always been interested in the lake, wildlife, the hydrology. And so today I thought I would talk about the lake management plan that we've been bouncing around this idea as far as the current residents who are here for a number of years. Previous administrations with Jan and with Kathy and Anton, who were presidents, they've all seen different iterations, but it's nice to see that there's been a buildup of more heightened public awareness, community awareness, and the need. And unfortunately, we're seeing more changes, whether it's recent changes with the climate or whatever phenomenon that can't be fully explained, but we're surveying more for harmful algal blooms. We're getting more educated on different plants and invasive species from the press and from the states, if agencies that are asking for this information. And so I thought I'd start out with a discussion on the history of Brook Lake, a brief history based on records and documentation, previous reports, memoranda to the town and former property owners associations, and then go into what's been done so far, and then kind of the plan of action that we're asking support from the membership and community. So, and this stuff, obviously I haven't lived here for that long, so people like Bobby and Friedel will know a lot more of the details, but just based on records, it's very interesting. But overall, I think the goal that we all like to see is to enhance the property value and recreational opportunities here, and support the biological and physiochemical processes associated with the organic evolution of this man-made impoundment, which basically this is. So in November 30th, in 1936, this dam was built. It's known as the Kittredge Dam, and named after the owner of the property at the time. It was transferred to the Brook Lake Improvement District on November 30th in 1954. This mesotrophic lake, so there are basically three classifications of lake. Eutrophic is what you're thinking of when you drive past farm ponds and you see it's all green, pea soup looking, lots of frogs, water snakes, bass, cattails, not much wind movement, pushing water along. That's a eutrophic lake, shallow. Oligotrophic lakes are some of the deep lakes, clear lakes you see in the Adirondacks with a lower pH, crystal clear, cold water. Plants don't grow all the way from the bottom to the top. They're just limited to the shorelines. So the Great Lakes are an example. Mesotrophic just falls within that spectrum. So not too shallow. There's some areas that are deep that don't have enough oxygen, so it's kind of a dead zone. And it can get a little colder in the middle and the bottom, but there's enough wind action along the shoreline. So you might have a mix of warm water fisheries like largemouth bass, sunfish, but then you can have some cold water fish like walleye, which we have here. So our mesotrophic lake is only 80 years old, and back then in the documents in 1969, it stated that the purpose of the lake is now considered to be for the enhancement of real estate value and for recreation. And in 1960, home values ranged from $25,000 to $100,000. So 11 years later, in 1947, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation performed a site visit and concluded that this lake, by virtue of its artificial origin, has definite undesirable characteristics. It is quite apparent that at this time is not suitable for any variety of freshwater fish. And the reason for that was when they cleared the land to impound this area, they didn't really do a good job of clearing all the vegetation out. A lot of the trees were left in here. So that increased high levels of tannic acid or organic material that just decomposed. So you had a lot of sulfur in the water. So it's like sulfur dioxide, high dissolved carbon dioxide, and that's not going to allow for plants and animals to grow in there. So United States Geological Survey surveyed this lake between June 10th and the 12th in 1969. In that report, they reported there were only about 3 major issues faced by the community, and that was ice damage to shoreline property, black fly and mosquito emergence, and unsightly weeds. So within that time frame from 37 to 69, so 30 years, that's the first documented record that I've come across saying that there's a weed problem. And of course that's so subjective. People say there's a weed problem now, people said there were weed problems decades ago. It's very subjective. But it was enough that they used pesticides to attack the mosquito and the black fly larvae. And around that time in '69, I don't remember offhand when DDT was banned, but probably some nasty stuff was used here, which was at that time acceptable, and herbicides to control the plants. So at least we know there were some herbicide treatments being done here, and then drawdowns conducted for ice damage prevention. So in 1969, this survey stated there was a low diversity of aquatic plants, invertebrate life, and only a few sunfish and small bass were observed. So over time, from 69 through 97, the community in the town had engaged various environmental consultants to work here and take lots of water samples, look at different nutrient budgets, look at the hydrology, the flow of the water, and then look at take some investigations on what type of aquatic life there are here to formulate some, I guess it wasn't a strict management plan, but just some ideas and capture what the lake profile is like. So in '91, Dr. Robert Cortman of Ecosystem Consulting Service conducted the largest comprehensive study here, including bathymetry, which is looking at the contour of the lake underwater and seeing what's consolidated versus unconsolidated sediment, like what's the mushy, muddy, mucky stuff compared to what's hard bedrock underneath here. So it gives you an idea of sedimentation and accumulation and decomposition over time. Watershed nutrient budget, so our watershed is somewhere around, I think, 900 and some odd acres that all spill, kind of lead into this 110 surface area lake. So that's our entire watershed. So they're trying to calculate what the impact of gravity essentially and having water move down, and then all the homes and developments and things that could contribute to phosphorus and nitrogen and other pollutants coming in here. And then of course the aquatic plant surveys and the organismal surveys. So the flushing rate at the time is determined to be 1.929 per year. So that means for about at the time in '97, every 283 days you would expect the majority of the water in this lake to be turned over, like flushed out of here, based on more precipitation from rain and snow melt. Okay, so we're always on top. We're diligent in speaking with the town to see when the lake, when it's lowered in terms of removing the boards and lowering the lake. We want to make sure we get this lake filled up as soon as possible in order to have a full recharge of the lake and make sure the water comes over the spillway. When you see the water come over the spillway in the spring and early summer, you know that a lot of nutrients are being flushed and spilled over and kind of cleansed, so that's important. At the time, bladderwort was the predominant aquatic plant considered to be a nuisance, with milfoil, namely Eurasian milfoil and coontail, ranked below. And bladderwort is the one that most people are complaining about even today, and I think Ina was talking about it the last meeting here. It's a plant, it's a native plant, but it's a plant that doesn't have much nutritional value, so the grass carp aren't really selecting it. They're eating the milfoil and the coontail and some pond weeds, but the bladderwort also have an adaptation that they can seek out invertebrates and strangle them and use the nutrients from actual invertebrate animal life to get nutrients. They're not just depending on photosynthesis. So that's the stuff that gets blown in May through June. It gets into the coves. A lot of people might think from a distance that's algae or algal blooms, and it can be a substrate for harmful algae if they get collected and grow within a matrix or a mat, but bladderwort is not an actual algae mat. Okay? So why is all this important? Why bring up the history? Well, I bring it up because it's a man-made lake. There are a lot of human perturbations that this lake undergoes because of people, for construction purposes, rebuilding or building new beaches, any construction around the lake, adding more sand to beaches is just artificial sedimentation. The mere fact of developing homes around here affects the buffer zones, the wetland hydrology, and then of course increases. Anyway, in 1998, the consultants, Cortman, provided the town with a watershed management plan and identified accelerated eutrophication due to internal nitrogen and phosphorus loading. So all the stuff that's accumulated in the lake serves to be kind of a reservoir or a source for more plants and algae to use for growth, and then they die off, and then you get a massive load of nutrients available to them again for the following year. They also cited substantial septic-related load as a concern for our lake and identified increasing development in the watershed to be future problems. So they also stated that increased sedimentation due to runoff. So for example, the highway, the Taconic State Parkway, you have at least two major inlets or areas where water runs straight down, may hit a antiquated retention basin to capture some stuff, but largely a lot of sediments and who knows what, hydrocarbons or other heavy metals can be coming in that way to our lake. When you have an overabundance of aquatic plants, that increases what's known as habitat complexity, which is, just think about if you are, let's say, a pack of wolves. You kind of want to have a little bit more open area to chase down your deer, but if you're in an extremely dense forest, it's very difficult to chase down deer and take them down. So what happens is you won't have wolves anymore. You're going to have coyotes who can go after little things like mice and rabbits and foxes. That's essentially what's happening. What they identified in 1998 could happen to our fishery is you're going to see a lot more sunfish that don't go after other large fish for prey, and they're going to just pick off little aquatic organisms, and your bass will be stunted, and you're going to have numerous but small sized bass overall, and we've seen that for a number of years fishing here. So the high priorities then were, number one, localized retention basins, which we've seen being built around here and maintained. Number two, preservation of wetlands, which we see here for the most part. Use of green belts and vegetative buffer areas, and having that development across the street there get axed and then the land turned over to a public land trust and eventually Fondstock was a huge win for this community. So thanks to everybody involved with that. Implementation and enforcement of soil erosion control and ordinances, that's largely regulated by the town. And sound use planning. So in 2007, Dr. George Knockline, he's a limnologist that's been doing a lot of work at Lake Oscawana and neighboring lakes in this area, conducted our last aquatic weed study here, and that was prior to an intervention with triploid sterile grass carp. And in 2010, Brook Lake participated in the joint New York State Federation of Lake Associations and the DEC's Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program, which continues into this year. So 2014 was a bye year, but for every year since 2010, we've been conducting water samples. If you see that white buoy right there in the middle of the lake, we sank last year, Ina and I, we sank a cinder block there just to use as an anchor. So anytime we take our water samples, which is supposed to be from the deepest area of the lake, we'll just clip our boats onto that and take the sample. So if you see anyone messing with it, please tell them to leave the buoy alone. But if you want to just anchor somewhere, that's a nice anchor. If you want to go there and hang out, have a little moonlight picnic on your boat, that's fine. In 2012, based on community meetings with the town, with ourselves here, it was a hotly contested, debated, still remains a controversial issue, was the introduction of sterile grass carp. And that was done based on looking at our weed study from 2007, and it determined there's about 75% of the lake was vegetated. And based on that, it came down to about 5 to 6 fish per vegetated acre. That was the state's recommendation to be kind of a conservative number for stocking. And so both the senior fisheries biologist Mike Flaherty and the aquatic plant biologist Scott Kishbaugh, who really is one of the two people in charge of the CSLAP water monitoring program, they determined, based on memoranda and public meetings, that they found no reason to object to stocking of the carp in here to see what would happen over some time. And in the past 6 or 7 years, because of various construction projects on district beaches, we've had at least 3 deep drawdowns in excess of 6 feet, which can affect the water hydrology, the nutrients, the level of plant life, depending on how severe the winter is. So those are some other perturbations that had occurred along with the grass carp. And going back to Oscawana, they tried other things. They looked at pesticides, benthic shade barriers, which is just basically taking a giant black tarp, covering your underwater shoreline area, letting the plants die, taking the tarps out, and then you'll have a weed-free patch until next year. But there are a lot of pros and cons, a lot of labor involved. Scuba divers to pull out weeds and making sure you get the roots. That's very labor intensive and expensive. The mechanical harvesting that they've done there, in their report by Princeton Hydro, they concluded that because of their mechanical weed harvester, that led to excessive milfoil growth, because the harvester was chopping down plants, and milfoil spreads vegetatively, meaning you chop a plant, it's kind of like an earthworm, the other half grows. So a lot of milfoil was then spread all over. So our lake is about 15 to 16 feet deep. Their milfoil was growing 19 feet. So that's about the max milfoil can grow. And imagine if our lake had milfoil attaining that size, it would be the entire lake. So, and recently Lake Carmel stocked grass carp, and then Candlewood Lake Authority stocked 3,813 triploid grass carp into Candlewood Lake, which is a 5,000 acre lake, and that was a much higher stocking rate of 13 fish per acre. So I know Ina said she attended the last New York State Federation of Lake Association meetings this past May. The general consensus there, people were saying they weren't very pro grass carp stocking. So that leads to the next proposed action of this, which is a lake management plan. And since budgets are coming up, we've bounced around the idea of looking at hiring various consultants. All right, so Ina's been very diligent in working with Sam Oliverio and meeting with some of these consultants. So they're licensed, certified professional limnologists who have the capacity, varying capacities depending on the size and scope of their companies, but to not only provide consultative services, which would be reviewing all the data and documents that we have on this lake, but also to provide and conduct certain studies. So a lot of the lake studies are about 25 years old, so they would need to repeat some of this information to then analyze and see what changes have occurred, and then what would our next best steps be in terms of a feasible, cost-effective, and actionable solution for preventing situations like in Lake Peekskill and Oscawana and other impaired bodies of water. This individual or company would then be also coming in about twice a year, one in maybe like the winter and one around this time of year, to give us updates to the community, just like here or at town hall, and report their findings and give recommendations. If we decide, well, we want to try something else for aquatic weeds, let's say like benthic shade mats around the district beaches or whatever, they can say whether or not they provide those services. They can provide services like the bathymetry mapping, which we have in our budget line approved from a year or 2 years ago, to do a contour of this lake to see how much has changed from 25 years ago. The reason why that's important, as I alluded to before, with all the sedimentation being an issue, if you have a good bathymetry map, a very detailed one, they could determine how much sedimentation has built up, especially in the coves, like by Park Beach, down by Moon Beach and that cove over there, the next cove over there as well, just to see how much sediment and muck has accumulated over time. that would be helpful. Is you need quantitative data if you're going to make a case to the Taconic State Park Commission to say, hey, look, you built this, you renovated this parkway, you have all this material that's accumulated here. We need some help. If we look to do any kind of dredging, you need this information. If they can't help financially, they may have